how I would start this is to recognize that the period that we're going through, and you mentioned the accelerations, is actually confronting people with one of the most difficult things that we all confront in our lives, which is the idea of change. And change can be terrifying for people. And so what I thought I would do is put together some points here that will help us think about what to do during change, during times of disruption. And these slides have nothing to do with hospitality and everything to do with hospitality at the same time. So I'll take you through these 8 points quickly. The first part is to recognize that whatever it is that we're creating in whatever business is to recognize what it does for people. And there's a certain amount of obviousness in this statement. However, it's seldom properly recognized. We typically fall back into patterns and rhythms and formulas that end up commoditizing whatever it is that we create. And you could certainly say that that's the case today in the hospitality industry. But even if you look at iterations of iPhones or various mobile devices, what people care about is how to make their life better ultimately. In the work that we were doing with Apple for many, many years, you know, this premise is to focus on the things that matter to people as opposed to the speeds and feeds or the tactics. And what it means is the way that we frame any problem that you encounter in terms of trying to create value is, I think that you have to have a hierarchical order to that thought. And the first part of it has to be, what are the human outcomes that you're delivering? What is it that you're doing for people fundamentally first? It's what Steve taught us. That's what we've been doing throughout a 30-year design consultancy. But from those human outcomes, you then are able to form a strategy that support those outcomes, and then ultimately get to the tactics that deliver on the strategy and ultimately the things that you're looking for people to experience. So we think this type of framework is a critical thing if you're trying to frame all of the different things that you can do to serve an industry or serve a business and to create value. The second point is, an idea is not innovation. Lots of people get up in the morning, take a shower, and think of the next new thing, and are coming up with a new idea. But ultimately, an idea is adoption. And adoption is something that's getting harder and harder to do. When you are talking about this age of acceleration, one of the things that is happening is the rate of change is exceeding our ability to adapt and adopt to that change. And so we're in an interesting time where the speed at which our lives are changing makes it very difficult for us to deal with it. And so one of the things that Thomas Friedman and others talk about is this idea of dynamic stability, but the idea of designing an organizational flexibility is one of the keys. The third point, which we talk about a fair amount, is this idea of beware of best practice. And I think in the hospitality industry in particular, this idea is an important one. We find that a lot of people believe that they're making something that's differentiated, and customers don't believe it. They don't see it, and it's because we tend to deliver it in the same ways. And so one of the biggest concerns here is, while looking at best practices for operational efficiency is important, if you do that when you're defining your experience in hospitality or any other business category, you're ultimately commoditizing what you have. And that the more you achieve parity in the industry, the less value you're going to be able to extract from creating that parity. The fourth point is uncommon insight. And this is important, trying to think about ways of deriving information, making your product better, giving yourselves competitive advantages. It's interesting because we tend to look at trends, we tend to look backwards a lot. But if you look at in 1989, what was going to be the biggest transformative thing to happen to people in their lives? Few people would have said a decentralized network of information nodes that are linked using hypertext. No one would have said that. We wouldn't have been able to extract that from some view that has us looking back. And so it's important for us to remember that sort of half of everything is the future. This is an example of a company that we've worked with here in Asia. They came to us as a telco with 23% market share. And the shift in this was to express to them that they had to move from selling in the pipes, essentially the lines of their information, and start delivering emotion. They're now at 56% market share because of the fundamental shift in the way they were thinking, because they had looked at their peers and built everything around what their peers were doing. So again, this differentiation is a critical piece. The sixth point here is staying relevant and connected. It's important to be relevant and connected, and what do you do when being relevant is changing at the rate of change that it is today? And this is something that Professor Scott Galloway at NYU has created called the new algorithm of value. And what it says is that the companies here in the upper right-hand corner are successful because of the number of receptors that they have in a market and the intelligence they can gather from this interaction. And the premise is, you know, every time you do a Google search, Google gets smarter. How do you as a company get smarter through the interactions that you have with your customers, not just digital, but any type of interaction, and are able to refine and develop your product to be more relevant? The companies in the circle in the upper right-hand corner also represent 50% of the NASDAQ stock market today. So when you look at value creation, that relevance and that connectivity is something that is today a leading case study in that. The seventh point is, how can we create irrational loyalty? You know, people tend to say that, in general, there's less loyalty to brands today and that they change and can move around very quickly. But I think that one of the key elements that reinforces that irrational loyalty is the idea that what people say about you is as much a value as almost anything else that you offer today. And we know 50% of purchases based on word of mouth. What most people don't understand is 80% of word of mouth is generated by direct experience. So if you're not designing your experience and focused on that, you're leaving money on the table, and you're potentially commoditizing the types of products you offer. And then the last point, this is Hal Gregerson from MIT. He has written a book called Questions Are the Answers, and I think this is an important book. I think it's an interesting read, but asking yourselves the key questions, in some cases the hard questions. If you're focused on the tactic, success opportunity is pretty limited. But why does your company exist? We know people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Are you focused on the human outcomes? Design is not what it looks like, but it's what it does for people. Is your offer a meaningful experience? Marshall McLuhan talks about many companies communicating information. The problem is it doesn't necessarily lead to driving behavior. And then the fourth one here is, how do we know what to offer? And I think Genevieve Bell says it well when she says she's always felt an obligation to build the future that she wants. So these 8 points, I think, are ultimately the secrets to value creation, regardless of the industry, regardless of the category. And it leads back to, are you creating better human experience for people? If that's the case, you're creating human outcomes will lead to better business outcomes. That's my piece. Thanks.